So, David, tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your background with the state of the state.
Thanks, Dusty. It's great to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about what really is a very unique kind of speech in politics in Maine. A little bit about myself. Right now, I am a political and media consultant for Bernstein Shure. I live in Portland with my wife and two kids. I was Deputy Chief of Staff and Communications Director for Governor John Baldacci for 4 years and have helped to compile and write 4 different State of the State addresses. I was a reporter before joining the Baldacci administration for 17 years and have covered numerous State of the States and State of the Union addresses, both in Maine and in Washington, D.C. And then during the 8 years of the LePage administration, I was often involved with kind of the work on the progressive response to Governor LePage's State of the State. So that's kind of my background, and I think why I was asked to join here today. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll just start off by saying, you know, the State of the State address is really unique. I mean, we think about politicians giving speeches all the time and talking a lot, right, to voters. But nothing really compares to the live broadcast, typical live broadcast of a State address during a joint session of the Maine House and the Maine Senate in the state capitol in Augusta. You know, the pomp, the circumstance, the process, the procedure, the herald, and then also by sheer length and nature of the speech, it's different than what political leaders, governors typically do. They tend to be an hour, sometimes shorter, sometimes longer, but they're long. They tend to be more policy centric, more heavily policy focused than other more typical political speeches, stump speeches, or speeches at events where someone is being honored or a new business is opening or something like that. So they are unique in that sense. And a lot of people and a lot of work goes into every State of the State address, including a lot of individual work by the governor himself or herself, who works to make sure that the massive amounts of information come across in their voice.
Yeah, so tell us a bit about that individual work that you mentioned, because you have been, you have helped to craft a couple of States of the State. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I've helped with 4 separate State of the State addresses. And I will say one thing that is about the State of the State and the actual process of bringing it together is when you're in an administration, there are lots of competing interests, both internal and external, that are jockeying for a mention in the State of the State. They want you to brag about their department's accomplishments or to mention their issue. You know, for example, you know, you might have folks who advocate for expanded health care. They want that Medicaid expansion highlighted. Someone who cares about abortion rights would want the governor to talk about abortion rights. Business groups would want that shout out. So, you know, when the process starts, you know, generally, or at least the way I handle it, I can't say everyone does it the same, is I would sit down with the governor and talk with them about what they wanted to say, what the narrative, what is the story that we wanted to lay out, you know, the arc that we wanted to lay out. And then the departments and agencies would come to us with sections on their policy priorities that they are working on behalf of the governor. And then we try to stitch all that together. And it starts out super, super long and super, super complicated, and then it's winnowed down. And I would say, you know, Governor Mills especially, she has such a flair and such a love for things like poetry and visual imagery that I feel confident that she will add those very personal details into that policy wonky text as well. I think in her first, she either opened or closed with a poem, and I would expect that something like that again from her. She's very visual in that nature and likes that type of language. Governor Baldacci always liked the historical references and tying what was happening today to the past, and that was the voice that he wanted. And you know, when you write for people for a big speech, you know, you can put any words down on the paper that you want, but if you can't put them down in a way that the person who is delivering the speech can articulate, that they are comfortable in their skin delivering, then it won't be successful. A funny little thing that Governor Baldacci did in transitions, he liked to start sentences with the word "so" as a transition word. It's just a natural rhythm of how he spoke. And while, I would not write that way typically, when you're writing for the governor, you want to write in his voice. And so we would use that transition word more often than we might, in the abstract.
Sure. I think that's a really interesting, thinking about crafting words that someone else is going to say. Like, you really want to try to get into their mind and have a sense not only of what their priorities are, but how they actually talk and think. So I appreciate that insight. So you talk about like jockeying positions and different policy interests or communities or constituencies wanting to make sure that, things get their moment in.
So, the state of the state is probably, if we think about the 4 years of a gubernatorial administration, the state of the state is a yearly address where the governor lays out her priorities and with a lot of focus on the budget. For example, this year, we believe that Governor Mills is going to talk about her supplemental budget proposal, which includes how the use of $800 million of federal dollars are going to be used by the state, what her priorities are for those. So, you can't tell every story in an hour speech. You can't talk about every program. So do you lean heavily into the Department of Health and Human Services? Do you lean heavily into the Land for Maine's Future Fund? And everybody who cares about those individual programs wants to be mentioned in the speech because it gets the most coverage of any speech. It's carried live, typically, at least by main public, sometimes by the other networks. And with one caveat, last year, Governor Mills had to deliver the State of the State in a recorded message because of COVID. We couldn't have the gatherings of that size and so forth. But generally, it's carried live. There's instant analysis from the networks. It's usually the lead story in all the newspapers. So being a focus in that speech, it really heightens the attention that is paid to any issue. And there are things that stand out when the governor talks. The goal of the speech is to make sure that people who hear it know what they're supposed to get from it, right? And so that's why you've got all the departments and agencies who are literally doing thousands and thousands of things that are part of the governor's agenda. They want to be mentioned. And, it can be a new boat launch at a state park because that's really important to a certain community, certain constituency. It could be a major change in the way the child welfare ombudsman is mentioned because, your advocates feel like that's such an important issue. And then it is where you launch a lot of your new initiatives for this legislative session or into the future. And finally, it's where you brag about your accomplishments, what you have done in the last year. This year, we have a state of the state happening during a competitive gubernatorial race, which would seem to show us with two governors running against one another, former Governor LePage and current Governor Mills. And I think that what you can expect, in addition to all those accomplishments and the handling of COVID and the distribution of those federal funds, she's going to make an explicit argument for why she deserves reelection. She may not use those type of political terms, but she is going to want us to know that we have come out of the past 3 years, out of an unprecedented circumstance, but we have managed it well. We are on the upbound. We're on the right track. Things are getting better. That's where she is going to be. I mean, the old, I think it was the Reagan election. Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? And that's a complicated question right now, right? I mean, the economy, for most cases, is booming, but we've got problems with inflation, and we've got the COVID and the COVID fatigue and the impacts that has had on society, on business, on the state. So it's, you got to balance a lot of different things. And I think laying out that vision, that hopefulness, but bragging about the accomplishments will be the key.
So it's a bit about, highlighting what has happened and highlighting what we hope to have happen or what the administration hopes to have happen. To what extent do you think that the things that come up in the state of the state really do, to what extent does that speech shape the policy making to come? So are legislators and leadership listening with an ear toward like what their marching orders are, or what kind of issues they're being instructed to take up? Or
well, I would say that no governor can issue marching orders to the legislature and have any chance for success with that. They are separate branches and they protect that separateness very carefully. I think what John Martin used to say, that the governor proposes and the legislature disposes, and but what it is it is an opportunity to lay that agenda out in a controlled, singular, unitary way. And you will see, I suspect most governors do it, you will see them call out members of the legislature, call out people in the audience that help them make a point to build relationships. People's ideas get incorporated as a way of building favor and showing support for their ideas. So, as the governor comes in, well, I'll just step back. So the House and Senate come together in a joint session of the legislature, and then they dispatch members of the House and Senate to the governor to invite her to join the legislative session. They come down and back in this formal process and say, hey, we've invited the governor and she's accepted and she is on her way. And she comes down and there's the greeting, with people on the aisle, the hellos. It may be a little bit different, a little bit weird with COVID. I mean, I don't know that there'll be handshakes like there typically would be in hugs. And she comes into this pomp and circumstance. And then, that attitude carries on to the podium where she's greeted with usually with robust applause from both sides of the aisle, because you're applauding the office as opposed to the person and the policies. And then, can have the speech used as an opportunity to build bridges with folks, to call out special accomplishments, to talk about friends and relationships, which, as you know, in the legislature can be very important to bridging differences and gaps. And finally, I'd say, for the most part, the governor's policy proposals get adjusted and changed and reviewed by the legislature. But there's so many that what you typically see is there are big fights on a few things, and most things go through the legislature in kind of a normal order, especially things from the administration, the departments, the agencies. We see a lot of important but smaller bills that aren't flashpoints that pass through committee with minor adjustments, pass the floor under the hammer or by unanimous vote, unanimous consent, and then move to the governor for signature without any conflict whatsoever. And then, maybe on 10% of things, that's where you might see the conflict between Democrats and Republicans and the legislative branch and the executive branch.
That's always been my experience. I've been doing legislative work for about 15 years, and the majority of it has been with pretty technical, work in a very small slice of policy, mostly in the criminal code. And virtually all of that business happens, I don't want to say behind closed doors, because it's not as though it's not open to the public. It's just not that many people. You either care about it quite a lot and a lot about it, or for the general public, it's just less interesting. It's not terribly controversial. It's, a smaller group of people working through complex stuff together to come up with the best way to solve a problem that we all know we have. Mm-hmm. And so I've been really grateful to have so much of my policy career on those kinds of, it's complex problem solving. It's not a big public fight. And I think we forget that a lot of government still happens just like that.
Well, and it's because, if you think about when the part-time citizen legislature idea was developed, government was a lot less technical. The issues that we face were a lot less technical. And if you think about the specific debates that happen in committees like the Energy and Utility Committee or the Insurance Committee, where you have, just really complex regulatory environments that demand expertise. And it's not sexy or glamorous, but it is the nuts and bolts work that determines, our interconnectedness with the grid, or, whether community rating stands with insurance policies, or how we regulate automobile insurance, whatever the case may be, very technical stuff. But, I think the big themes that the governor probably will talk about, I think, will be healthcare, where there is an ideological difference with Republicans. I think she'll talk about abortion. These are guesses for me, but healthcare and abortion, based on what's happening nationally and the concern at the level of the Supreme Court around abortion rights, I think the governor is going to talk about that and the implications for Maine. I would expect her to talk about her environmental legacy, the work that she's done on clean energy, and education. And education, I mean, it's one of these things that we talked about forever, and governors of both parties have worked on getting to that 55% of funding, and that happened for the first time ever. I mean, that is something that we hadn't seen before. It was in legislation, but it never had the money, never had the resources. And so I think that when you think about the places where she's going to focus, it's going to be on some of those big signature accomplishments. And then I would be shocked if we don't see her talking about how the state has handled COVID, and in many ways was a national leader in the COVID response. If you base it just on numbers and vaccination rates and things like that, the state has done well, although with, like everywhere, Omicron and Delta have been problematic. I mean, feels like it's never going to end. We're doing a Zoom instead of being in a lunchroom somewhere, still. But I think that, when you think about the big issues, I think that she'll spend some time highlighting and talking about those. And if you think about it, where are Democrats and Republicans likely to have a friction point? It's going to be on some of those same issues. School funding versus tax cuts, environmental policy, and healthcare policy, particularly abortion.
I think too, that raises an interesting point, for folks who maybe are less connected with the political process, and you think of, the election every 2 years or whatever, that actually there's sort of a flow or a cycle where, you get elected in November, that first state of the state, January, February, you've probably got a particular kind of message because you're just coming in, you're trying to create unity, to, rally everyone together. In the second year, you're looking down, a long track to your next election. And so that probably informs the kinds of things that you're highlighting in a different way, and maybe, doing her warm-up act for re-election.
Well, that first address is the hardest, and again, because of the unique nature of the speech. Most governors probably have never done a speech quite like that before being elected. Second, it comes early in the administration, and the first task after filling chairs and trying to get people hired through the transition and getting your staff oriented is that you have to present a complete state budget in about a month after being sworn in, maybe a little less than that. It is an incredible dash to get that work completed. So you are doing many things at the same time in that first, not to use, a tired metaphor, that first 100 days, there's just a lot that has to get done, from staffing to goal setting to understanding the nuts and bolts of the budget so that you can present that document and talk about it before a joint session of the legislature. The second year is kind of a reprieve because you are coming into the short session and it is an election year, but you're not up for election as the governor. So it really is about the accomplishments that you've done and your party has done, because you want to gain or maintain control in the legislature. The third is that big 2-year budget presentation again. And then the fourth, which is where we are now, is the speech that, leading in to the election season. And so each of those in form and content are a little bit different in what you're trying to accomplish.
Do you expect that that budget priorities are a core part of what makes its way into the state of the state, because
Absolutely.
there's the state of the state, and then we expect the governor to present that budget in the next week or two, say.
A budget is a values document. It is a visionary document. It is what you want to do. Where you put your money says what you want government to accomplish. So, one of the arguments as a progressive that we've always made is that, a budget is a values, moral document. It's not just numbers and spreadsheets. And so I do believe, and I don't have any inside information on the state of the state year. I haven't talked to her staff or the governor, but the budget will be, how the big elements of that budget will be part of the state of the state, because this is the biggest audience and best opportunity to set the initial framing around what her priorities are. She will get to tell her story her way in front of a joint session. And, will she be aggressive? Will she be unifying? Will she be partisan? Governor's not particularly partisan, except on a few issues. She's got good relationships across the aisle. She has governed as a moderate in many ways, I would say. Not all, conservative in some ways, I would say. And, I think the way she talks about issues will model that. The interesting question is whether she will draw specific distinctions between she and former Governor LePage. Will she go back to 4 years ago and talk about employment numbers or the state's size of the state's economy and make that direct comparison? Will she call him out on healthcare? She was very aggressive in the campaign about Medicaid expansion, did it on her first day, stroke over the pen, all that kind of, is she going to call back and make that really hard distinction? And, I suspect if I were working on this speech, my strategy would be, how much of that do I do that doesn't jeopardize my agenda going forward, that doesn't right out of the gate drop a wedge with my Republican friends who I would like to have come on board for a supplemental budget, So it's that give and take, that balancing act about, what your top priorities are. And how you need to do both. So where do you put your emphasis? How do you balance that thread?
We do still have a budget cycle ahead of us. And this will be a big one because, we have both really deeply pressing issues before our population and communities, and also I think probably more money between, the surplus and federal funds than we had any expectation of,
Yeah, it is really a generational opportunity to approach solutions to complex and long-lasting problems. I mean, whether it's housing insecurity, whether it's access to prescription drugs, whether it is the ongoing and devastating opioid crisis, reinvestment and rebuilding of public health infrastructure networks. I mean, we have a generational opportunity.
Paid family and medical leave.
Right.
Can't let that list happen without
paid family medical leave, which is, we should have learned during COVID how important that is. I would also say reform to the way we handle childcare. We've got a failed marketplace with childcare delivery, not just in Maine, but everywhere. We don't pay people enough, but it's too expensive at the same time. Places are closing, families are struggling. It's part of the Great Resignation that you see talked about in the media, people quitting, fed up, trying to do too much. So, I mean, there are big issues. Now, whether the governor is super aggressive on all of them or picks one or two, I can't say, but I know she's going to. I don't know. I speculate that she will pick some big issues, and by necessity, there will be others that she doesn't talk about, and that kind of also gets back to the jockeying. Is it which of those big issues? Even if she's on board, there just may not be space for all of them. So how does she make that decision?
Right, and probably balancing things that will be unifying messages versus things that she really wants to put her stamp on. I would invite folks in the room or on Facebook Live as we wind down, if you have any questions about the state of the state or want to do some forecasting with us about what we expect to see later this week.
Or what you hope to see.
Um, yeah, I'm curious what people, hope for out of this. I don't know if, lots of people know what to expect, but I know, at the women's lobby, like we are really hopeful. As you said, it's a generational opportunity to take what we know is a real crisis scenario for a lot of families around childcare and paid leave and healthcare. COVID has shown us all of the gaps, and between federal investments and surplus money, there is an opportunity to build out infrastructure that did not exist before. So that's what we are really hoping for and working for, and looking forward to hearing. Because I know that paid family and medical leave is important for us, but like we also care about healthcare access and the opioid crisis. And so there's a lot of scope for the imagination right now.
Well, it's just that, often, we are at government, there's the argument about what government should do. And I do think that for many people that don't necessarily follow politics closely or government closely, they kind of tune in on that and worry about government being too big or trying to do too much. But I do think that what we have seen through, the crisis that we are enduring and have endured is that there is a role for government in making sure that people are okay, to making sure that, they are healthy and safe, and that their families are healthy and safe, and that, the kids are getting a good education, an appropriate education, and that these, healthcare is fundamental. And not just fundamental on a personal level, but fundamental in a system that that it runs off the labor that folks perform. And that if we are not able to have health care, or to know our kids are safe, or know that they're getting a good education, then we're not going to be as productive or successful at work. If we don't have those supports, and the market can solve a lot of problems. But we know in terms of healthcare and childcare, it is not a rational marketplace, and the costs and the demands, it doesn't line up well without either a strict regulatory environment or direct investment.
I was thinking that when you mentioned childcare earlier, like if anything exposes the failure of the market, it's the fact that families cannot afford childcare, and childcare providers cannot afford to live on their wages.
Yeah, I mean, it is a circle of a problem.
Mm-hmm.
To pay a living wage, you have to raise the price of the product. But the price of the product is already. I mean, when my kids were younger and in childcare, my childcare bill was more than my mortgage and my car payment. And that's just that's not tenable for a lot of families. But I don't know that would be necessarily an issue that the governor would tackle. I think she's going to be, I would love it if she did. I think she's going to be more focused on a middle of the road economic message about strengthening the economy. But I think those supports play into that strong economy.
Well, I'd love to close out if you have a favorite, a favorite memory or a favorite moment, or, something that really comes to mind that like makes you chuckle around state of the past.
Well, it's funny when I wrote them and was so deeply involved with them, it was incredibly hard for me to watch them to be delivered. I felt all the anxiety of the governor, plus my own anxiety, and the hopes that he or she would do a good job, that I had done a good job, that all of us as a team had done a good job. But I think that the things that you take away from it is that being able to work closely with the governor on something that is very important to them, and very important to the state, and very important to the political landscape, and to be a part of that it's a very special opportunity and a very special feeling. And mostly when you get to the end, you're just so glad it's over. because it is hard. It is hard. It is hard to write. It is hard to deliver. I think in terms of the funny moments, one year we were the first to use teleprompters with the speech, and the governor had a new pair of glasses. And both of those issues got as much attention as our budget proposal. You know, the glasses and the fact that he used the teleprompter, which I guess just foreshadowed, you know, some of the stuff with Biden and the teleprompter and all that. I mean, I had no idea at the time that it would be such a big deal. And then I would think one of the biggest mistakes we did is that we printed a copy of the State of the State as written, not necessarily as delivered, and gave it to everyone as part of a program. And we did that because, you know, I had seen it, we had seen it at the State of the Union that they did that it was a nice keepsake for the people who were invited. But what we found is that everybody was reading along, all the eyes were down. And, you know, so maybe if I had it to do over again, I'd hand it out as people left, as opposed to when they came in, so that they were more fully engaged. It was like everybody was, you know, you could see them following along to see if how it was delivered followed the text.
That's so funny. And I imagine too, I mean, I tend to sort of go off on my own, even when I have a written, you know, testimony or something. So I think that would stress me out.
Oh my gosh. You know, they all wonder a little, you know, and they've practiced it, but you know, governors, presidents, incredibly busy people, right? So they practice, but not the kind of practice, they don't have the time that you or I would have. If we were given the biggest speech of the year, we would have a lot more time to spend on it than what they do. And, you know, I've seen folks deliver them who are working from a written word or a teleprompter, but also from their memory, and they get off on a kind of include a tangent, get off and then come back, and, you know, come back in the wrong place in the speech. And then, you know, you can see them, you know, that makes your heart sink as someone, you know, you sink for them. But, you know, these folks are all pros, they recover. And I would say if I were telling folks, you know, something to kind of watch out for, I would say, look for the jokes, see what they say, see who they make fun of, see if it's nice, see if it's cutting, you know, look for who they call out in the audience. You know, does the governor mention a senator from the Republican side of the aisle? Is that person a co-sponsor on an important piece of legislation that she's working on? You know, who is she invited if she's invited guests that she calls out? Because she's using those folks as a way to build bridges or tell stories. And they can help you understand, you know, maybe where she's thinking both about the legislative session and the election coming up.
I love that guidance. Maybe we'll make a little cheat sheet, what to watch for.
And then she may not call anybody out, and it'll you know, it'll just be every other time that's happened. You know, that could happen too. But.
We'll do a bingo card. Abortion rights.
Unprecedented circumstances has got to be the center box. Everybody gets that one, and then we can have abortion rights and clean energy. 55%. You want that one. You know, in your straight line, those will be there. Right. I think.
Well, we could take bets on whether or not we'll hear, you know, former Governor LePage's name mentioned or not.
Right. It's a real dilemma, right? Is it implicit? Is it explicit? You know, is it just a comparison of the record, or does she ignore it? I don't know. I don't know what I would do either. So, I mean, it's a tough question.
All right. Well, I have to say, I'm looking forward to this speech more than I think I ever have, because I feel like I've got my cheat sheet going into it. So, David, I really appreciate you taking the time with us.
Oh, thank you. It was a lot of fun. I appreciate the opportunity, and thank you very much.